this afternoon to serve you guys as well as recording this. So thank you for joining us today. I'm joining you from sunny Philadelphia. I believe it's also sunny probably across the whole state today. So hopefully you're going to get out and enjoy some of that. So I'm glad you're here with me here today. And we're here to as part, I think it's session 2 of our spring training series. And I'm Diane Perry. I am the Pennsylvania Eastern Region Program Manager here at the PEAL Center. And my colleague Heather is here and she's going to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. My name's Heather Mara. I'm a training coordinator in the Pittsburgh office. And yeah, welcome to our second session of our spring training series. And next week will be on Tuesday again. It'll be May 6th, and the subject will be 504 plans. So look forward to that.
Thanks, Heather. And Heather is really good at picking up as I go through my trainings and my presentation. When I say or name a certain document and that you guys can get it on our website or you can get it here or there, she's going to be popping all those things in the chat for everyone. So please stay tuned to that chat that Heather's going to keep updating of all the various things that I say throughout my session. A lot of times she picks up on things that I totally forget that I say I'm going to say, but I know I trust that she's doing that. So it's really good to have that backup. But today, if you wouldn't mind, yes, well, let me reintroduce myself in the mannerism as I am a white woman with wearing a kind of like a light pink top, and it's got some little designs on it, light pink and gray, like a little gray on it. I am wearing glasses and my hair is usually brown, but it's got some blonde in it as well. So, and I'm happy to be here. During our time together, please keep yourself muted unless you want to speak. Use the chat to make comments or ask questions. And again, Heather will be looking at the chat. She will interrupt me at any time in case there's something specific that I would need to stop during the presentation. Sometimes I do even stop because I'm going to want some input from the group, so I know that I didn't put you all asleep, and we may want some feedback from all of you in the chat. So I don't necessarily look at the chat the whole time as I'm presenting, so I trust that Heather will interrupt me if I really need to answer something specific at that time. Most of the questions and comments will be addressed during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. And that'll be when we will shut the recording off at that time as well, so that, you know, your questions are not recorded and you can speak as freely as you would like. But we do prefer that you refrain from disclosing any personal details. And if you need to do that, we have family resource specialists like myself as well that can help individual families with any of those individual questions. And then just let us know if you need help turning on closed captioning before we begin. Today, our topic is a transition plan is not just a form. As I go through the presentation, I also add in some of my personal story as well, because I am the parent of a young man, David, who is 32, who also gives me permission to speak about his life and some of the things that we did when he went through transition. Our mission at the PEAL Center, for those of you that may not know much about the PEAL Center, but our mission at the PEAL Center is to educate and empower families to ensure that children, youth, and young adults with disabilities and special health care needs lead rich, active lives as full members of their schools and communities. And we do that in various ways. As I mentioned, we do have family resource specialists who do provide that individual assistance to families and youth and helping them navigate the special education system as they're receiving services throughout their school life. We also have many webinars and trainings on our website, so please visit our website. There's a plethora of all great, wonderful information on there. We do resource fairs and community events. So we are out there in various locations as well, sharing all the wonderful things that we do at the PEAL Center. We also house the family to family health coordinator, Kelly King, who helps all of our families with navigating many of those special health care topics and mental health and anything that has to do with the special health care needs. And we also have youth coordinators and that navigate and help many of the various youth activities that we do at the PEAL Center. So as you can tell, we are a plethora of all kinds of good stuff. We are also what's called the PTI. We are the Parent Training and Information Center in the state of Pennsylvania. In IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it is federally mandated that every state must have a PTI, and every PTI is also federally funded. So the services that we do provide are at no cost to families and youth. So today, what we're going to be doing is discussing the importance of having a vision to guide all of that transition planning. And throughout that, as you're going through the transition planning, there is various areas that I'm going to be describing throughout this session today, and generate some of those out-of-box ideas for the transition portion of the IEP, because it does need to be very unique to each student. And so generating those out-of-the-box ideas really can kind of spark up the school team to do some really good transition planning for students. And then there's a ton of resources to support successful transition outcomes. And with that, I do always like to say that transition, just understanding transition to that adult life, is overwhelming. I can tell you as a parent, I was overwhelmed. There is a lot of planning that needs to happen. There's a lot of resources out there. It's all about finding out what works best for that family. So if you are a family, talking about and thinking what works best for your student and your family, as teachers and professionals who support youth and the families, really looking at individualizing that for every family that you serve and how you can help them with whatever resources are out there. So developing that vision for the future is key. That is really key in knowing what it's not like it's in stone, that you have to do this or have to do that when you're transitioning, but it's a vision. These are the things I might really want to do. And planning for that is really important, thinking about, do you want to further your education? What kind of job or profession or, career do you want to have? Where do you want to live? Who do you want to spend time with? All of those wonderful things. And during high school years are the prime time to be thinking about that and advocating for yourself. So youth, if there's any youth on here today, it is your turn to really tell the IEP team, what do you want, and really brainstorming with some of those out of those box ideas. Now, in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it does require that transition plans start at the age of 16. But in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a statute that states that transition services start at age 14. So during the IEP, there's that section, and as you go through, there's always that section that says transition. So whether you're before 14 and you're like, they'll say, oh, this doesn't, we don't fill anything out until you're age 14. This is what that means. This is that time, transition on that IEP. And as you're going through this transition process, you're building up your team, right? Yes, you have your school team, but you want to build in those community supports as well, and all the other resources that I'm going to be going through. Now, there is a great website here, the transitiondiscoveries.org, which I'm sure will be put in the chat in any minute. And the Transition Discoveries website started as a collection of infographics conveying quality indicators identified by youth with disabilities and their families. And now it's an interactive website full of great information. And we're going to go through some of those actual indicators that were identified by the families and by the students. And it's based upon a series of dreams and goals that focus groups came together. And I remember my son David and I were a part of that focus group years ago in the planning, all before it even became Transition Discoveries. It started as focus groups with families and youth, which was very exciting. And some of those indicators that emerged was transition planning, youth development, person and family directed planning, family engagement, relationships, independent living and community engagement, cross-agency collaboration, employment, and post-secondary education. So they are the indicators that really was the force behind the building of Transition Discoveries. And that has really grown into a wonderful community and a wonderful resource for families and educators and students navigating transition. So we're going to go through some of those indicators during our time here together. And I'm going to start with family engagement. And, you know, what is true family engagement? And you might want to sit back and think about that as a student, as a family member, as professionals that support us. What is true family engagement? How do we do that? Well, it really needs to start with a vision. What does you and your youth life really look like? What does it really look like in that perfect world? And then when you do that, and I always love vision planning because it's all about those hopes and dreams. And we did that with my son David. You know, we talked about what do you want for your future, David? And he told us, you know, he wants to get married. He wanted to move out. Oh my God, he started that probably even before he was 14. He wants to move out. He doesn't want to live with his family. He wants to, you know, be on his own. You know, he wanted to go to college. He wanted to drive a car. I mean, all of those things is what he was saying, as any teenager wants in their life. That's what David was saying. And then what we did is we kind of broke it down. All right, here's those hopes and dreams. What can be done in 2 to 5 years? What can be done in 5 to 10 years? And kind of break it down. What can be done now in that student's life that's going to get you to those hopes and dreams? So it's really important to be thinking about, what are your interests? What type of life do you want? You want to claim it and then write it down. So why is it up to you to take charge and be a self-advocate? Now, each of us gravitates to what is important to us and what it is we want to do. Now, because of that, you want to be able to share that with others and what's important and what you want. There are many services that are required by law, but the people to provide those services are stretched very thin. You know, so for example, you might have heard the term a supports coordinator. And supports coordinators work for various agencies so that when a youth is identified to receive some type of county services through their county mental health and intellectual disability and autism services, they are identified with a supports coordinator. Well, there's different agencies that have them. But again, sometimes those supports coordinators are, you know, just looking for that first job. So they might be there a few years and then they move on. And then they're there for a few years and then they move on. And sometimes they just get spread a little too thin. This is why you need to really plan. This is why it's really good to make connections and make those social connections around as you're going through transition. And not only supports coordinators, but you may find that there is a lack of support in, you know, various other communities within the agencies that support youth. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those different agencies. But, it's all about the funding that comes down from the federal government to the state, and then the state, and how they disperse those funds and everything. So a lot of times some of those things aren't as clear cut, and you may need, again, to make sure you're keeping yourself educated about what are all of those supports that my child could benefit from in order for them to have a good transition. But it all begins with that vision and that advocacy. And as youth development, again, which is one of those indicators from that focus group, we can talk about what the self-advocacy rights and responsibilities look like. So when a person turns 18 years old, they are adults. Disability or not, you're an adult at age 18. And with that come certain rights and responsibilities. For example, the Americans with Disability Act is an example of laws that protect from discrimination, an individual from discrimination. But then you're going to start to hear terms like alternatives to guardianship, powers of attorney, surrogate decision maker. So these are all various terms that you're going to start hearing in transition. And like I said in the beginning, transition can be very overwhelming, but it's all about what do you need at this time for your family and for that student, and who is best to support you with that. While in the meantime, you're educating yourselves on some of these other terms that you're hearing about. And you're here today. So you're getting a lot of that information and a lot of those resources today, which is really, really good. And we're going to be providing you with many resources towards the end of this PowerPoint. And you will also get all of that as a follow-up email. There's also things to be thinking about when you turn 18 about getting your state picture ID. And now, what is it? May something is right around the corner where everybody's going to need a real ID if you really want to travel any place. So the real ID is the thing to be getting now. All right. So a good transition starts with good transition planning. And all planning starts with person-centered thinking. If you haven't heard that term before, person-centered thinking keeps the focus of each type of plan on the person it is written about, prioritizing the person's dreams and their goals, and it reflects their current interests and abilities, as well as what is needed to move toward the person's dreams and goals. Again, it's that vision. What's that big vision? How are we getting there? What do we need to do to move that needle further so that they reach their hopes and dreams? And this is a slide to let people know the 3 general types of planning. So generally, it's a person-centered plan. There's also something called an individual support plan. So when you do get registered with the county office and you get a supports coordinator, they do up what's called the individual support plan. And if you're still in school, you do get that IEP, the individualized education plan. So here is a wonderful link that will go into the chat, which is the Planning for the Future checklist. This checklist came out over a little over a year now. And I expect, and we expect at the PEAL Center, that every student should have their own transition checklist. You can download it from our website. They are also available in paper form. If you wanted to request that, you can also contact us. But this is a really, really important document. This transition checklist is for the students to use with the support and guidance from the school and all the other support staff that support the student and the family. So this checklist is a guide, and it takes you through from the very beginning at age 14. What are the things that you need to be thinking about and doing at age 14? What should you be talking about in middle school? What kinds of things are we writing on that IEP during this time frame? And so these are all those questions that you might have about transition is in this checklist. And if I have time towards the end, I can always go to the checklist and take you through it a little bit. But the way that the booklet is made up is it's broken down by age. And then as the student gets older, it goes to the next grade and then the next grade. And then, to kind of see. So even if you haven't gotten it and maybe, you or your student is in 12th grade or older, that's okay. You get it now, and then that gives you an idea of what should have we been doing. Oh yeah, I did that. But it's an actual booklet and things that you can fill out. Yes, it's a checklist, but it gives you a whole bunch of resources in there. There's an acronym page at the end. It's just a wealth of information. So if you don't have it, you need to get it, no matter who you are supporting and what your role is here today. The next indicator is called person and family directed planning. Again, focusing on that person-centered planning. And what does person-centered planning do? And who do we need to bring, who else do we need to bring around to the table, right? So when you're doing person-centered planning and you're doing IEPs, you bring all the typical people that you or your student utilizes. So maybe they have therapists, maybe they have support staff, maybe they have administrators assisting them, maybe they have a behavioral team, but maybe you need to start bringing in some of those other county resources as well. Maybe you're bringing in someone from the Office of Developmental Programs. Maybe you're bringing in somebody from the Office of Vocational Rehab. And these are all terms that you're going to start hearing. And some of you may even be way ahead and know all of these terms already, and that's okay. But it's time to really make sure that all of the folks that a student might need in order to help them take those steps towards moving towards that self-determined life, which all starts with that vision. Now, if you're a family member or a student here today, your homework from me is to, if you haven't written a vision, you need to do that. And I'm happy to help you with that. There's lots of people out there to help you make that, but it's really important to have a vision statement. And that drives some of the things that happen during the IEP. Because if you have goals and if you have a career or something that you want to be working towards, all of this should be being worked on that IEP. That IEP is a legal document, so things that are written on that IEP should be happening around transition planning. And you want to make sure that that transition planning is robust. So not only do you have goals on the transition, and I'm going to go through some of that with you a little later, but there's also services and activities that should be happening during transition as well. There is a handout around the annotated section of the IEP. So the transition section of the IEP, and hopefully you can find that, Heather, specific to transition, just the transition section. That is really important for you to have, because the annotated part kind of breaks it down for you what you can be putting, thank you, what you can be putting in each of those sections. So the employment section, the annotated tells you what you need to be thinking about, what are the resources you need to be finding, all of those various things. So it's really important for you to have this annotated section of the IEP for the transition, and that will be a nice guide for you as well. Be sure you have a transition file, because as I said in the beginning, transition can be very overwhelming. And as you're probably hearing already, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to do for transition. So having that file is really critical during transition planning. During that transition planning on the IEP, you want to make sure that the present levels are actually current. You know, by the time you become a young adult, there's no reason for things under that present level section to be saying what happened when you were a baby and you were born and, you know, you went to, you know, made this or what, you know, those things are when you were younger. You need what's happening now. What's the present levels? What's life looking like for you? um, and pay careful attention to in that section, because as I talk about a little further, you know, there's different transition assessments that might need to occur to get more of those present levels. And in that section, you also have the parental concerns. And this is a place where the family's voice should be heard. You can write your own parental concerns and have it inputted on the IEP. Sometimes the school district will summarize what you're saying at the meeting and put it in there, but make sure you check, make sure, you know, it's accurately reflecting what you said and what your concerns are or what your thoughts are. It's also a good place to put in your vision statement as well. As I just said a few minutes ago, there are certain assessments that should start to occur during transition. School psychologists may administer aptitude tests or conduct functional behavior assessments, but there can also be things called ecological assessments, which is actually looking at the environment around the student. Transition coordinators should also be at your transition meetings. Every district must have a transition coordinator. Find out who it is and what can they bring to the table. What can they tell you about transition? Guidance counselors and various other teachers are part of that transition team as well, and they may have some suggestions around various transition surveys or questionnaires. Sometimes they'll conduct interviews or do interest inventories to start getting more of that information of the present levels and what, you know, what does the student want? Where are they at in certain areas? And where would the school need to start working on as far as transition? And the information gathered by these informal assessments supports the team in identifying the strengths of the student, the needs of the students, and any potential transition goals that might need to come out of this. So this information should also be included on the IEP. I will tell you that sometimes transition assessments there's a lot of them out there. This is not an exhaustive list here. This is where I also want to say that on the PEAL's website, there is a training series of webinars called Transition Tuesdays. And I know Heather's going to put that in the chat for you. The Transition Tuesday, she's going to put that link, is a series of, I think it's 9 sessions. And it was done a couple years ago. Myself and Michael Storr, who's with the National Technical Assistance Center, we joined together and we broke down transition. And we broke down it in all the various sections. One webinar was just specific for assessments. It's a really good one. Michael goes over what some of the resources are out there. What are some of those other assessments that, you know, the team might not be thinking of. If you have a complex student, you might need a more unique type of assessment for that student. So it kind of talks about what those resources are and what can happen during that time frame. So, but check it out, because there are, you know, we break it down. We also had families join us. We had self-advocates join us on those sessions. So you get to hear the voice as well of not only just the professionals, but the families and the students themselves around anything that had to do the nuts and bolts of all of transition. I couldn't express more how important transition planning is and should be student focused and student driven. This is a really good time for schools to really start helping students start running and doing their own IEPs, student-led IEPs. If you haven't heard about it, Google it. It's an amazing, great way for students to start thinking about and taking more control of those IEP meetings and really getting their voice heard. So I really encourage students and families and the school teams to consider student-led IEPs, especially at transition time, because a lot of times students have they have the goals around self-advocating for themselves, and this is a great way to work on that goal, is a student-led IEP. It is their life. That's what this IEP is about. It's their supports to help them to be successful. And they need to have primary input on their dreams and their aspirations. The family and school provide input and serves more as a coaching capacity. And it kind of starts to make a little shift there. And I'll tell you that sometimes that makes the family a little uncomfortable, because up until this point, you've been doing all that guiding as a parent, and you've been doing all the, and now it starts to shift a little when it gets to be transition, and that student really needs to, you need to be more of that of a coaching or mentoring capacity at that point. In other words, you have to cut the apron if you wanted to get it to be more successful. Acknowledge barriers, though, and brainstorm ways to overcome them, because there are, there's plenty of barriers, but the idea is, how can we work towards finding a solution? This is the student's life, and they need to have the primary input on all of this. So I ask you, and you don't have to put it in the chat, but I want you to be thinking right now, what are you doing now that does assist with that student to be more, having that IEP more student-led and helping them with that goal and their dreams? What are you doing right now? Just think about it. You don't have to put it in the chat or anything, but it's just something to be thinking about as we continue going through this session here today. There are typical choices. Continuing education. What does that look like for the student? Does that mean college? Does that mean a trade school? Does that mean, some other type of vocational opportunity? What does that continuing education look like? Maybe they're just taking a class at the college. Maybe it's not even a class that you get college credit for, but it's just a class on campus that they're getting used to going on a college campus. What does employment look like? Or do they have a career that they want to start working towards? Is there volunteering that can happen just for them to start getting out and doing different things? What does that community involvement look like with their friends and colleagues if they're working part-time anywhere, or their peers and classmates? What does that socialization look like? Especially when you hit middle school and high school, you got clubs, you got sports, you got all kinds of activities happening at the middle school and high school level to start building and thinking about their futures. What does that mean? What does that really look like? Meaningful use of time. Everyone needs a reason to get out of bed in the morning. What is it? What is it that's that motivation? What is meaningful for them? So when you're doing transition planning, this slide kind of shows what that vision could look like. That vision could be that goal. Maybe that goal for a student is becoming a veterinarian. They want to become a veterinarian. So then you have, okay, you want to be a veterinarian? What do we need to do in order to get there? So you break it down for the students so they can see they're going to need to go to a veterinarian school for 4 years. But prior to that, they're going to have to graduate from a 4-year college and take some biology and chemistry. But even before that, they're going to need to graduate from high school, take the SATs, do all that college stuff. So really breaking it down for the student helps them see, oh, okay, these are the things I'm going to have to be thinking about and doing in order to reach those goals. Okay. Now it could be anything, but we just have that as an example. Now, if there is a goal that's listed in any of the 3 areas, be sure that there's at least one activity. So in that transition section of the IEP, if you have a goal in any of those 3 areas, which is employment, post-secondary, independent living, there should be at least one activity that is developed that is addressed it within the IEP for that goal. And that is what's going to link that instruction for that. Okay. So writing transition IEP goals sometimes is a little bit different than your measurable annual goals, but I mean, they're still measurable. They still have to be measurable, but it is specific to transition. So you still have to have, you know, clearly defined what is it that they're working on? What does that criteria look like? How well will they do that goal? How consistently? And how is it going to be progress monitored? So your measurable annual goals will sometimes be reflective in that transition section of the IEP as you're writing it. They can connect and should connect depending on what you're working on. Now, an ISP, which is the individualized support plan, that is developed through you and your team through the Office of Development Programs. So if you are registering for intellectual or autism services, you're doing that through the Office of Developmental Programs, and that is where an individualized support plan is written up, and a supports coordinator is helping you with that. Now, an ISP is a document that covers all aspects of an individual's life. So it's like everything, but it should coordinate well with an IEP. So both can be reflective of whatever that vision is for the future. Okay. Remember to think through issues of health and safety, as well as quality of life and fulfillment. And make sure you're getting input from everyone in that student circle. Teachers, respite care caregivers, family members, neighbors, co-workers, and friends. And all of their voice is really important because they see that student in a different light, depending on what their role is, right? So a neighbor, they see your student, they're out in the neighborhood doing various things, and you as a family member might not see some of the things that they're doing. So they have a different perspective of of the student. So their opinion sometimes might look a little different, but it might be very helpful in any kind of this planning for the student. Transition planning, again, is one of those indicators, but it's huge. It's one of those huge things, right? So let me get into the IEP a little bit and talk about some sample statements. So when you get to that section of the IEP, the transition section of the IEP, and it starts with post-secondary education and training. Here's just a few samples statements that sometimes are written right there at the top. Sometimes a district and this team might say that there's no interest or desire right now, or they're undecided. There may be students already that they know they want to go to a certain, type of college or university with or without support. So these are just some example statements that could be how they're written on that post-secondary right there in that section right there where it says post-secondary education training. Could be written right there. Now you'll see on the right-hand corner there, measurable annual goal, yes or no. So depending on what that overarching goal is for transition, is there an annual goal, measurable one, written within the body of the IEP that's going to help meet that particular goal? And you have to think about that as an IEP team. And again, on that annotated IEP, you'll see, then that'll help you with the thinking about that. If so, you circle yes. If not, then you don't. For example, if the student maybe isn't interested right now, of course, there's not going to be an annual goal. So you would circle no. But if they are, have some type of goal written there, underneath there, you'll see the courses of study. So, that veterinarian, for example, You know, if they're in high school, a course of study might be that they're already taking biology or chemistry, so that would be written there. Of course, any type of math or reading, that's probably going to need to be there too to help them meet that goal. And then underneath that, you have your service and activities, right? What service or activities? Maybe there's college fairs that need to be, they need to be going to. Maybe there's research on a website around colleges or universities, you know, or a particular um, career or something. And you would write that service or activity, where it's going to happen. You know, if there's just one college fair, then of course it's just going to happen one time a year. But again, this is how that thinking should be occurring when you're filling out this transition section of that IEP. And then that second one's employment. And as you know, employment really matters. What does that job look like? Everyone can work. There's always something that somebody can do. And there's all types of various employment out there. Of course, there's competitive employment where you're working full-time or part-time, where you're making at least the minimum wage, and you're doing typical job responsibilities. There's also supported employment, which is competitive work in integrated settings, specifically targeted for individuals who, because of their disability, need ongoing supports or services to perform such work. Examples of types of support might be a job coach who checks in weekly to assist with problem solving, or a personal assistant who's at the job the majority of the time assisting with maybe some physical or medical needs. And, you know, my son David, he has a job coach, you know, because he's working at Home Depot, but he needs some guidance as far as some of his duties sometimes and what he should be doing. Or if he's using particular equipment or something, sometimes that job coach is there to help him with that equipment as well. But on the IEP, again, you know, it's the same thing. What's the employment goal? What's the career they maybe want to work on? Or what do they want to just be in a competitive employment? Is there some kind of goal, measurable annual goal that they're working on? Maybe, maybe not. Are there certain studies, certain courses they should be taking or that they're in already that's going to help them? I would think math and reading are definitely always going to be there because you're probably going to need that for any job. And then underneath that, you know, what type of service or activities can be happening throughout the school year for this annual IEP? There could be employment fairs too, you know. Maybe they're going to job shadow a certain job or something. These are the things that are written in this section. You also have the Office of Vocational Rehab. I did talk about them, mentioned them a little bit earlier, OVR. And OVR is a national program designed to help people find work. And there is a part of OVR called Early Reach, and they start at age 14. And what they do is a lot of them go into schools and start doing various transition activities or supports for a student to help them prepare for work in the working world. OVR is in the financial situation as some of the other adult services sometimes. So in Pennsylvania, they do not have enough funding to serve everyone who applies and is eligible. So you may have to wait to get services sometimes off and on. I think right now, I feel like I heard that they're back to their waiting list right now, but there are times where there are enough resources for them. And a counselor from OVR can help you better understand those services as well. But even with that, even if you are eligible, they have something called that individual plan for employment. Now, it's not an actual IEP or an ISP, but they have some kind of plan because they have to have a goal of what they're helping that student with as far as getting a job, or that individual and getting some type of paid employment. And then that third section of the IEP, independent living and community engagement. What does that look like? There's several different opportunities as far as when you think about living engagement, right? An apartment, a house, you know, sharing and living with somebody, whatever it might look like. But when you think about living on your own, now, I will tell you that sometimes I'll find an IEP where they don't have any kind of goal here, you know, that they'll live independently on their own. And I'll say to the family, and I'll say, really, how is their financial literacy? Are they really good with money? And do they know how to, if they were to go to college, do they know how to navigate, living in a dorm and doing all these other things? If they want to buy a car, if they get their license, do they know what that looks like? Insurance and all that. And all of a sudden the wheels start learning, oh, that's independent living too. So independent living isn't just, making a bed and washing dishes and all those kinds of things. It's really living life, right? And so you have to, again, earlier I talked about generating those out of the box ideas. What does it mean to really live? What does that look like? What are some of those goals that you can be putting in here around that? And what are some of those activities that should be happening around post-secondary independent living? Think about communication and assistive technology. How is the person communicating throughout their life as far as independent? Will they need some type of a different evaluation or some type of specialist? You want to think about that, because not everybody communicates using verbal or some other type of way. So there's all kinds of communication out there, and you want to be sure that you're addressing that on the IEP as well, preparing them, right? Again, community living, independent living. Are they voting? Are you registered to vote? Where can you find, where can you find information on the candidates? How do they do that? Again, this is something that can be, you go to websites, maybe that's an activity, a service or activity to help them understand what is voting, how do I do that, what age, all those kinds of things. Where do you go in the neighborhood? All kinds of things. How do you get involved? And then for men, you all have to register for selective service. Now, you may, if a person has a disability, a lot of times, they will not get they'll get a denial, but you do still have to register for the selective service. That is just something you need to do. What does relationships looks like? Health and safety, relationships, what's that looking like? Again, another topic to talk about under that independent living section of the IEP. What are some meaningful activities that are happening? What are social and recreational opportunities that are happening in school? Any school-sponsored activities, the student should be getting that support. Any extracurriculars, the student, if they need it, should be getting that support. And it's important for the school to be providing that for the student. So you want to think about what are some meaningful activities for your student in order for them to build that social relationships. And I'm watching my time, but I mean, I don't know if you all can stay a little bit after 1, but we can do that too. I can't talk enough about, the relationships and social and recreational opportunities, but not only can it be addressed on the IEP, but it can also be addressed on your ISP, because there are activities and things that happen in the community that are not school sponsored. And that's where your supports coordinator and everybody else can help you with that. Maybe the student needs a personal trainer for something, to be healthy. So now that you thought a lot about life after high school, I'm going to review very quickly some of the resources. Again, you will get this handout, so I'm not going to go on there a lot, but you have services such as waiver services, like the home and community-based services. When a student does exit the school district, then that's where the county, when you're registered with your county, they can take over and they can see if you're eligible for any of those services. Sometimes there are waiting lists, unfortunately, for some of these services. But there are waivers that are out there for people with intellectual disabilities and autism. Again, OVR, it's an application process and see if they qualify or not. There's different housing out there that there might be waiting lists for. But all in all, the key is advocacy. Keep a file, keep a separate file, because you're going to be hit with so many other different services and things that you could be eligible for. So keep a notebook, keep it handy, write people's names down. When did you talk to them? Things like that. Take a friend with you if you can, or if another family member, even if they're just there taking notes for you, to keep the focus on the student and to keep you focused on what you need to do. So some reminders, even the best laid out plans, things will change as we are living today. Life is changing every day, especially within the disability community. So we're going to have to learn to adjust and be flexible through all of this. But remember, there's lots of agencies and people out there to support us as well. Again, here's a whole list of various agencies. Again, keeping that checklist, looking in your planning for the future's checklist, they are in there. And of course, the PEAL Center is here to help you. You can talk with a family resource specialist. You can go to our website and submit, that you want to talk to us about transition. I love talking transition too, so I'll put my email in the chat too at the end, or Heather might just do that for me too. But yeah, I wanted to leave time for questions, but we also, because I talked earlier that we are federally mandated and federally funded, we need to let our funders know how well are we doing. So if you guys can at this point, if you have another device, you can maybe do that QR code. There is an evaluation that we have, but don't worry, we will also follow up with an email, and there will be a link for you to fill out the evaluation. But I just saw the little chat thing. I'm sure Heather probably put that in the chat already too. So if you wanted to fill out the evaluation now, that would be great. But if not, of course, when you get all the information, you will be able to get that as well. So I knew what you were doing, Heather. Here are some more resources. When she sends that PowerPoint, you're going to get all of these links to all of these wonderful resources. Don't overwhelm yourself. You don't have to go to all of them today. Choose one every now and then. Again, there are lots of really good advocacy organizations out there for self-advocates to get connected to, so youth can talk to other youth and find out what are they doing. That's important, not just for the families, but for the youth to do that as well. And just some more resources for benefits planning and education as well. You'll see all that in there. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions, but actually I'm going to defer to Heather first, because I'm sure you've been following along in the chat there for me, Heather. And I don't know if there's anything from the beginning that I need to go back to, or anything that you want to bring up for me.
I have been keeping an eye on the chat, and it doesn't look like any questions have been put in the chat yet.
Okay.
You're covering a lot of information. So, but if anyone
Yeah.
does have any questions, feel free to unmute or pop questions in the chat, and we're happy to answer them. And I can stop recording so we can do that.
Yes, let's stop recording for that. Thank